Well, hey, my kindred spirits. Only 2 more sleeps till Christmas. How are y'all doing this evening? I hope that every one of y'all are doing great. Now, it is about, oh, nearly 5 o'clock on Monday, and I am getting ready to make 2 things that I make every Christmas. One is a Bacardi rum cake, and the second thing is peanut brittle, except I make pistachio brittle. I'm going to show you how to make both of those. But now let me tell you this, if you are getting ready to go to bed and you just want to hear the sound of my voice and all those stories that you know I have to tell, then just turn that phone over and close your pretty eyes, and you can just go to sleep with the sounds of Christmas cooking in the kitchen. But if you want to see how these things are made, I would love to have you join me, and I'll show you everything that I do to whip up these tasty treats every Christmas. So the first thing we're going to make tonight is a Bacardi rum cake. And this is the best recipe. I've been making this for nearly 30 years now, and we love it. It's not Christmas without the Bacardi rum cake recipe. Now, I'm going to go through the recipe and put it together and show you what I do, but don't worry, the recipe will be in the little description box below. And for those of you who are unsure how to get to that, if you're watching this video, there should be a little V over in the right-hand side of the video, underneath the video. If you press that, I think it says more. If you press that, there's a drop-down menu or a drop down description area, and underneath that we'll have the 2 recipes listed, and you can follow along easily with that. So let's get started with the Bacardi rum cake. This, I think, is so easy because you use a cake mix, and this makes it tasty, moist. It's perfect when you just use cake mixes and doctor them up with all the tasty ingredients that go along with it. So let me pull my recipe book over here, and this is the recipe that my husband wrote down for me nearly 30 years ago. He was taking it over the phone from somebody who gave it to him, and so I still have it in this book. But anyway, I'm going to use that as we follow along. So you're going to need a box of yellow cake mix, and I've always used Duncan Hines, but if you like Pillsbury or any of the other brands, you use what you like best. So we're going to get a bowl here, and we're going to pour our cake mix in the bowl. Let's see. Grab a knife here to cut this open. There used to be a book in the late 90s called The Cake Mix Doctor. I don't know if any of y'all are familiar with that book, but if you can get your hands on a copy of that, it's an excellent book because she talks all about how good just using cake mixes and then doctoring them up to make your own creations can be. It makes a delicious cake. As a matter of fact, I used to work at a catering company, and all of the wedding cakes that they made, they always started out with a cake mix. They did not start from scratch. They always used a cake mix, and then they added to it, and they were delicious cakes. They were known all over for how good the cakes were. So now, after you have added your cake mix into your bowl, you are going to add in 3 large eggs. So I'm going to set these right here, and I'll crack these one by one in the bowl here. I already have my oven set to 350 degrees, and I'm going to be using this Bundt pan to put my cake in, just because I think it's pretty. But if you want to make it in a loaf pan or even just like a sheet cake pan, you're welcome to it. But a Bundt pan looks prettier, so I would encourage you to use that. So we've got the 3 eggs, and now we need 1/2 a cup of cold water. I'm going to pour that in there. And then, let's see, we need 1/3 of a cup of oil. So this is just a vegetable oil that I got at the grocery store today. Let me tell you, that grocery store was slammed. If any of y'all are familiar with Charlotte, I went to the Harris Teeter on East Boulevard today, because I was there already, and I had to get, we like to try to get our standing rib roast from somewhere like Harris Teeter because their meats are better. And so that's where I got it. And my goodness, that little store was busy. All right, so the next ingredient is a half a cup of dark rum, and this is Bacardi Gold rum. I think that this container is, let's see, I think it was $6.95 for this container. So you're going to use a half a cup in the cake, and then another, is it a half a cup? No, it's one, yeah, it's another half a cup for the glaze too. So I'm going to pour a half a cup and a little extra and a pinch to grow an inch. We're going to pour that in there. This is so good. Oh my goodness. And then also, I love to use pecan chips in mine. If you don't like pecans, you can omit them. You can use walnuts too if you'd like, but it gives it an extra special flavor. So I would keep that unless you have a nut allergy, of course. So I'm going to add, and that package of nuts is 2 ounces, but again, I'll have the recipe for you in the description box. And let's make sure I haven't forgotten anything, because I can sure do it if I am talking and working at the same time. No, I've got it all. So I'm going to turn the volume down, don't worry, but I'm going to use my mixer to mix it all well. Okay, now let me make sure that it's all incorporated, and it is. So I'm going to grease my Bundt pan here, and then I'm going to pour this off into the Bundt pan. That is so good. So good. I'm just using a little bit of coconut oil cooking spray to grease my little Bundt pan with. Make sure you grease it real good, because you don't want this cake to stick. So what I do, you don't want too much in there. You can overdo it too. So what I do is I get it good and greased, and then I go get a paper towel. And if it's too much in there, which it doesn't look like there is, I'll sometimes kind of dab it out just to make sure I don't have too much. But it's perfectly good right there. So that should do it. And so we're going to pour it off into our Bundt pan here. Let me tell you about this mixer right quick. This is an old General Electric mixer. It's older than me. My parents bought a house when I was born in 1973. The house was fully furnished. It was a small house, but it was fully furnished, and it was $16,000. And the home had so much furnishing in it that you didn't need to buy anything. They already had a few things, but they were newlyweds, so they didn't have a whole lot. Anyway, I still have several pieces of furniture in my home and appliances that were my mama's from that house. And, you know, the house was a couple of years old when I was born. And so that is probably at least 55 years old, and it still runs. Isn't that amazing? I'll never get rid of it until it dies, and I don't think it's going to anytime soon. They made these things with solid state parts back then, and so it'll last forever, that is for sure. Okay, so now I have my cake mix in my Bundt pan. We're going to pop this in the oven. I think it's a 30-minute bake. I always have to be careful because my oven runs a little bit hot. So I'm going to go ahead and set the timer for 25 minutes and check it just to be sure. So we're going to pop this in the oven. Then I'm going to get ready to make the peanut brittle, and I'll show you how that's done too while we're waiting for our cake to bake. So hang on. Okay, so while we are waiting for our cake to bake, we are going to make peanut brittle. You can make peanut, pistachio, pecan, walnut, whatever your favorite nut is. We just happen to love pistachios in our family, so that's what we use. My recipe comes from this Complete Wilton Book of Candy cookbook, and it is full of the best candy recipes. Oh my goodness, it is. There are so many wonderful things in here. This is copyright. Well, the original copyright was in the 60s. This is the this is a 1983 version. There is something in here called coconut balls. You make it with flavored jello and then you roll it in coconut. Oh my goodness, it is so good. They teach you how to make nougat centers and then you can dip that in chocolate. They teach you how to make different suckers, flavored suckers, confetti candy, all kinds of brittle, like I said, marshmallows, fudges. It's just the best old-fashioned candy making book. I love this. Y'all will have to tell me if you'd like to see some more recipes out of this book, because I won't be able to eat all this candy, but I can give it away. It is so much fun to make candy. Now, that said, let me tell you a few things before you ever get started making candy. What you want to do if you're new to this, you've got to read that recipe thoroughly, because you've got to make sure that you lay out and measure every single ingredient for the candy. The reason why is time is of the essence. When you make candy, you have got to time it, and you've also got to measure the temperature, because when you're making candy, if you cook it too long or too short or not up to the correct temperatures, it doesn't set properly. And you don't want all those good ingredients to go to waste if you didn't have everything set up properly before. So with that said, this recipe, it calls for, I'm going to just pick everything up so I don't have to move the camera around. It calls for 2 cups of granulated sugar plus 2 tablespoons of butter divided. So I've got that right here. And then it also calls for 1 cup of corn syrup, Karo syrup. It didn't specify light or dark. I mixed light and dark because that's just what I had to make that. And then you're going to need 1/3 of a cup of hot water for this first part. Again, you just follow along for this part, and then I will have the recipe down in the description box for you. Then you're also going to need a heavy bottomed pan. The reason why you want a heavier pan is because a light aluminum type pan will scorch your candy, and you don't want that to happen. So you want a heavy bottom pan. Then these are the other very important things you're going to need. You're going to need at least 1.5 to 2 cups of nuts, and then 1 tablespoon of baking soda. This is fun. It makes it foam up. I can't wait to show y'all this in just a minute. So baking soda, and then you're also going to need some vanilla extract. I've got about 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract and then another tablespoon of butter. And so I'm setting that aside. Again, it is so important. You must have everything measured out beforehand and ready to rock and roll, because if you fiddle fart around and you don't have something measured out properly, you could burn your candy. So you've got to be very careful. And when you're making this too, let me tell you this one last thing. I gotta make sure my timer doesn't go off on my cake. When you're making candy, put your babies to bed. Get them out of the house, get somebody to watch them for you. Do not try to make candy with little kids underfoot. I'm talking about like toddlers, because this hot sugar will burn the fire off of your finger. And if you don't want little ones running around if you accidentally spill something, so just get the little ones out of the house, put them to bed, then make your candy, and it will go a lot smoother, especially if you measure everything out first. All right, so I've told you what to do. Now we're going to get started. Let me set that aside. One last thing that's also very, very important. You're going to have to pour your brittle out onto a surface. I have a cookie sheet with some parchment paper on top of that, and I'm going to set it back here so it won't be in my way. You need to make sure you have that ready too, because when it's time to pour, you want that ready. You don't want to have to be looking for all of your things. So let's move my pot over here to the hot stove eye. Got a wooden spoon here, and we're going to go ahead and pour in the 1/3 of a cup of hot water. Already got a little bit too hot there, didn't it? We're going to go ahead and add, I'm going to take it off the fire right now. We're going to go ahead and add our sugar and our butter, our 2 cups of sugar and butter. Have any of y'all ever made homemade caramel before? It's so fun because you can just take plain old granulated sugar and heat it up and stir it constantly and then add butter to it, and it eventually will turn into caramel. And again, if y'all have never made candy before, homemade candy, I encourage you to do it because you'll be so proud of yourself. You can't believe all of the goodies that you can make. Okay, so let's try. I'm going to have to move some of this around, and we are going to start stirring. And this isn't something you can walk away from. You have to stay here and pay attention to this the whole time. So all we're going to do is continue to stir, and then I have this little doohickey here. I don't know what this is called, like a little brush, but it's a silicone brush. And so I am going to have to leave my eye for just a minute because I'm going to have to put some water in here. And what I'm going to do is what you're supposed to do is while you're stirring, you're going to see, I don't know how well y'all can see that. See how there's some little sugar around the edges here? What you're going to want to do is take your little brush and dip it into the water and brush around the sides of your pot to try to melt that sugar. Don't put too much water in there because it'll change the consistency of the candy, but you're just washing down the sides of the pot because you want that granulation gone. You want to try to get all of that granulated sugar melted so that your candy will have a really nice set. And what I like to do y'all have stockings? Do y'all do stockings at your house on Christmas? Like I've told you before, my children are grown, but we still do Christmas, and we have stockings and have a good time. And but always since they were little, in their stockings, they got kind of old-fashioned things. And so just kind of like, thinking about Laura Ingalls, and the things that she got in her stocking. That story really, really touched something in me because I don't know if y'all ever read the Little House on the Prairie books, but when Laura and Mary got a candy cane in their stocking, and Mary licked hers and then saved the rest for later, but then Laura couldn't stand it. She had to eat hers all at once. And because it was an old-timey days, they didn't have much money. And anyway, that really stuck with me. So I put those types of things in my kids' stockings. I put oranges and apples and nuts and peanut brittle. And so that's why I'm making the peanut brittle, is because I chop it up and put it in their stockings. Okay, now this is very important. You need a candy thermometer because you have to really watch the temperature here. And I'm going to cut this down just a little bit because what we want to do is we want to bring the temperature up to 300 degrees, and it's rising fast. I'm going to pull it off the heat, try to stir it down a little bit, and it's just kind of a back and forth game that you're doing here with your candy as you cook it. And so it's going up to 246. And I was just glancing at my recipe here. It says the entire cooking time should take about 10 minutes. I haven't been timing this, but that's probably going to be correct because it's at 250 right now. So we're almost to 300. And I mean, you can see that hot sugar boiling down in there. If that were to get on your skin, it would burn you. It would hurt so bad. So you do need to be careful, but don't let that intimidate you because it's so much fun. And cooked sugar is the base for so many different candies. Last weekend was my daughter's 21st birthday, and we made a Italian buttercream icing, and I've never made an Italian buttercream before. What you have to do is you boil sugar up to a certain temperature, and then you take egg whites, you whip egg whites like into a meringue, and then you pour your sugar syrup, your boiled sugar syrup into the egg whites and beat it, and then you add a bunch of butter, and that's all it is. There's not any powdered sugar in this icing, and that's the way I've always made icing, was with powdered sugar, but this doesn't call for it. It's my new favorite icing. I will probably never make powdered sugar icing again. It was that delicious. It was just very, it wasn't too sweet. It was very buttery, but it wasn't overly sweet like that powdered sugar icing can taste like. So, and you can see we're still cooking along here. Again, you want to keep stirring it because it will burn quickly if you're not stirring too. See how that's coming along there? Just keep at it there. Now, I made this a couple of weeks ago, and my thermometer wasn't working correctly, and so I wound up burning it, and I had to throw the batch out. And it burnt sugar smells like really strong toffee, but you know something's gone wrong in the cooking, so I had to pour it all out and start over. You can see it's just trucking right along here. I'm going to stop stirring it for just a minute, see if I can get that temperature to climb a little higher. And there it goes, 282. It is climbing. It's heading north. We're almost there. Have y'all ever tasted potato candy? Have you ever seen the old-fashioned potato candy? It's I think that they make it with powdered sugar, mashed potatoes, and then peanut butter as well. It's so good too. That's an old-fashioned candy that my mother-in-law used to make that. And she used to make Buckeyes too. I don't know if y'all have ever had Buckeyes, but those are so good too. 300, here we go. So we are cooking with gas. So at this point, you're gonna take it off the heat, unclip your candy thermometer. This is so fun to watch. I'm gonna do this first so you can see what it does, how it foams up. That is my baking soda. That is a teaspoon of baking soda. So I'm gonna pour that in here and watch that foam. See how different that looks? If you make it yourself, you'll see it just has a very different look to it when you pour that in. And let me pour the rest of the ingredients in, and I'll tell you why you use that baking powder. I'm also going to put in another tablespoon of butter and a teaspoon of vanilla extract, and then my peanuts. You add your vanilla extract at the end because if you add it in the beginning, it's going to cook out. The flavor of it's going to cook out because of all that heat. So you mix those in well and add your peanuts last. The reason why you add the baking powder is because it makes the candy foam up, and that foaming action causes little air bubbles, and it makes your peanut brittle light and airy instead of too hard to eat. Okay. So we've got that all mixed together. Again, you got to kind of work fast because it will harden on you if you're not careful. So we've got everything mixed. Let's turn this baby around right here. We've got our little cookie sheet that we're going to pour this out on. Well, you got to have some strong arms to do this because that is heavy. Get all that goodness out. Next time I do this, I'll have to try to get somebody in the house to be my camera person for me because I'd love to be able to show you what this looks like a little closer up. All right. So now, again, you've got to work fast before this sets. And you're going to smooth all of that candy mixture. And I'm going to get 2 spoons here. It might be easier. I'm going to look back at my cake. Okay, we got 1 minute and 50 seconds on that. And it may not be done yet, but I just got the timer set for that. All right, I'm going to put that in the sink. And that may be all that I can do. This may be some thicker brittle, but that is okay. I just love the way pistachios taste, especially if they're salted. The saltiness mixed in with all of this sugar just gives it the best flavor. All right, so now I'm going to set this aside, and that's going to harden pretty quickly. And after it hardens, I will take it and break it apart, and then I'll put it in little bags, and then I will put it in the kids' stockings for Christmas morning. So hang on just a minute. That cake is just about done. We're going to take it out of the oven, let it cool, and then I'm going to show you how to make that delicious glaze. So stay tuned. Okay, this has been in here in the oven for about 25 minutes. And I like to test it a couple of different ways. First of all, I like to do the pat test. And you can see how it's kind of springing back. It's not giving, so that's giving me an indication that it's probably done all the way through. But just in case, I keep a bunch of these skewers on hand, and I'm poking it in, and that's coming out good and clean. So that baby is done. So she is ready to come out of the oven. Let me show you something that I learned a long time ago. I learned my lesson well because I broke my old cake plate. After you have taken your hot cake out of the oven, put it on a little wire rack to cool. Don't transfer it immediately over to your cake plate because chances are it's going to be a lot cooler than that cake temperature, and you can crack your cake plate. And I have done it before, so I don't want you to make that same mistake. So set it on a little wire rack to cool. What I'm going to do is put a piece of parchment paper underneath here because I'm going to make my glaze, and I'm going to start glazing this, and I want the parchment paper to catch my glaze. So hang on, we're going to make that glaze now. Okay, so now for the last part of the video, we're going to make our glaze for the rum cake. So put another pot on the stove eye, and to that you're going to add 1 stick of salted butter. We're going to melt all of this butter. This glaze is so good. I like to make my cake a couple of days ahead of when I serve it to give the cake time to mature with all of that good glaze and all of that rum that's in it. It just gives it a better flavor if you let it sit for a little while. So that's going to melt. That stick of butter is going to melt. And to that, I'm going to add 1/3 of a cup of water to help that along. And now the recipe calls for 1 full cup of sugar. That's just way too sweet for our taste. So we use about 1/2 cup of sugar instead. So I'm going to add 1/2 cup of sugar to that mixture. And let me stir this around and let this melt. And the last thing you're going to add is 1/2 cup of this rum, maybe a little more, depends on your taste. Again, you want to add that last after everything is melted and cook it for about 30 seconds or so, just to let some of that alcohol dissipate, because you don't want a cake that's really strong rummy flavor. That just doesn't taste really good, but a little bit is fine. It's good. It is so good. I made this a long time ago and brought it to some coworkers, and those silly girls, they started acting tipsy. They kept saying, "You didn't cook that rum out of that cake, Lindy." And well, I probably didn't, but it was so good. This is a favorite. And I'll tell you, my favorite way to eat this is the best way to me. What I do is after Christmas, if it doesn't all get eaten, I freeze it. So I pop it in my freezer, and then so the day after Christmas, I come down and I fix myself a good hot cup of coffee. put a little cream in it, and then I slice myself a little piece of frozen rum cake. So that combination of that frozen rum cake with hot coffee, I'm telling y'all, it is so good. I know it sounds weird, but try it. You might just discover a new flavor combination that you love too. Okay, and that butter is almost melted. We're going to let it work its way just a little bit more. I got a new stove here, and used to you could control the size of the eyes. I mean, I guess I could move it over here, but I like this one better because this one doesn't heat as well. So you got to pull it off a little bit and keep turning it down. I prefer a coiled stove top instead of this glass top like this, but the coiled eyes are a little bit hard to find when they're the standalone drop-ins like this, so we had to get one like this. But I mean, it's fine, it works. It heats, that's all I need is something that heats it up, so it works fine. So we're just going to let that continue melting. I'll tell you what you'll want to do too is to keep, if you have a skewer stick that you use to check if your cake is done, keep that around because you need something to poke holes in your cake. If you don't have a skewer stick, you can use a sharp knife instead because you want to kind of poke holes all over it so that this glaze will go down inside of the cake and kind of permeate the cake. So that is almost ready here. While that's melting, I'll go ahead and pour my rum into my measuring cup. You can use spice rum if you like to. That's good. And have y'all ever had hot buttered rum? Have you ever drank that before? I found a recipe years ago, and what you do is you take apple cider and you heat it up with some cinnamon and a little bit of vanilla, and then you pour rum into that. Don't cook it too long, just kind of pour it off in there, and then you put a pat of butter on top of that and pour it off into a mug and sit next to the fire and drink that and tell old ghost stories. It's such a fun drink for the fall. Okay, so got our butter, sugar, and water mixture all well mixed, and now we're going to add in our rum as the finale. I'm going to pop that back on the stove eye for just a minute, and oh, that's perfect. Let's take it off. I don't want to cook it any more than that because I want that good flavor of that rum to come through. All right, I'm going to set that right there because this gets to be a little bit of a messy job. And what we're going to do is we're going to take our little skewer and go all over this cake. Just get a bunch of holes poked in it all over. Just like that. And you might find that your cake comes to a saturation point and you can't get any more of that glaze in there. If that's the case, then just put a cover over your glaze, set the cake aside, and then come back the next day and heat your glaze up again and try to get as much of that glaze into your cake as possible because it really makes it taste so good. And the cake is a very, it's a dense cake. It is it's sort of a wet cake. You'll just have to try it and see. It's so different. The texture is different, but it's so good. Okay, so I have all kinds of holes poked in that cake, and I've got my little brush here, my little silicone brush. I like to use silicone better than the basting brushes with hair in them because sometimes that hair, I think, is it boar hair. I'm not sure. B-O-A-R, boar hair. It sometimes it'll come out on your cake, and I don't want that hair on my cake. So we're just going to go around, and you'll have some that's going to leak out from underneath it. And what you can do is just scrape it back into your pot and reheat it later if you want to. But it's just a delicious, fun. This is kind of a calming little activity to do too before all the hustle and bustle of Christmas time happens. Although I do have to say, our Christmases are much more subdued. I think I mentioned that in another video, because our Thanksgivings are quite rowdy. We play all kinds of games and have all sorts of fun on Thanksgiving, but our Christmases are a little bit more subdued. So this Christmas, we're going to eat at 2 o'clock this year, which is a sort of a change, but we have in-laws now, so I need to be accommodating to our little daughter-in-laws, and so their families are they're having brunch on Christmas Day, and then the other one's having a 5 o'clock dinner. So they're going to come and eat with us at 2 o'clock. So we'll have everybody here with us, and that'll be a lot of fun. We're very lucky to be able to have them, so I'll take them when I can get them for sure. You're just going to keep going around that whole cake. And again, like I said, there may come a point that the cake feels like it can't hold any more moisture. So if it gets to that point, just leave it alone and walk away and cover it up, and maybe come back the next day and reheat your glaze and try to get a little bit more in there. And what you can do too is let's see, I hope you can see all this. Once you've got this part of the cake saturated, you can flip it and take your skewer and poke this side and give that side a good dousing of that glaze too, so that every square inch of that cake is covered in that glaze. Do y'all ever watch the videos where they go to Korea or Japan and they're in a factory where they make cakes? Do y'all like to watch that? There's no talking. All you hear are cooking sounds, and it's so calming to me. I've enjoyed watching that for years. I guess there's a name for it, but I don't know what it's called. But I love to watch like watching a macaroon, or is it macaron factory, where the little pretty almond flour cookies and meringue cookies. I think that's pronounced macaron, because macaroon, isn't that a different candy? I think it is. Anyway, I just love to watch them make foods like that, because it seems very calming, and food is something we all have to eat, and it brings everybody together, so it's interesting to watch, I think. I cannot wait to eat this. This will be a great grand finale for Christmas Day. Okay. And what I'm going to do, since it's cooled down so much, I'm going to go ahead and set it on my cake plate now, because I'm afraid that it's going to... Ooh, there we go. I don't want it to fall apart the next time I flip it, so that'll be the last time that I flip it. I'm going to let that be and let all of that yummy goodness soak up inside of that cake. Okay, so now we are going to break up the peanut brittle. And you can see how hard it is and see how beautiful that brittle is in there. Try to break it up as small as you can, because this will break your teeth if you're not careful. And you can also, if you want to get a hammer out, you can break it up with a hammer too, just into smaller chunks. Maybe even set it in a bag and bang it on the floor or the countertop, and that'll break it up too. But you're left with these beautiful little pieces of pistachio brittle, and it is so good. And like I said, what I'll do is I'll bag it up and then put this in the stockings of my children, and they love it. It's just a little sweet treat. Well, all right, my friends, I hope that that was entertaining and informative to you, and I hope that it helped lull you to sleep tonight. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to ask in the comments section. I'll do my best to help. But again, all of the recipes will be down in the description box for you to follow along. Thank y'all so very much for watching. I love you, and I hope you have a very Merry Christmas, and I'll see you next week. Bye.